During my elementary and high school years, I picked cotton.
Morgan Watson grew up in Louisiana.
We were out during the fall to pick cotton. We went during the summers to chop the cotton.
Laws kept blacks and whites separated.
There were white and colored, as they said, water fountains, separate restroom facilities. But that was the way of life, and you adapted to your environment.
Blacks were only allowed to hold certain jobs. Morgan wanted to rise above all of that, and he was lucky. He had what he called a greasy thumb.
I like to tinker with things, take them apart and put them back together. And I worked in a hardware store, and the white store owner saw my report card one day and saw that I had good grades in math and science and so forth, and he said, you probably would make a good engineer.
Morgan didn't know what an engineer was, so he went to the library to find out. He earned a scholarship to a black college.
When I came to Southern University, a freshman in 1961, the civil rights movement was just getting kicked off. There were other students participating in the city, and they had gotten arrested. So we marched downtown in protest of that.
In college, he studied to become an engineer, and he enrolled in the first computer class the university offered. Just think of what was happening during this time. Segregation's barriers were coming down. A university was offering its first computer class ever. And the President of the United States was challenging the nation to attempt a feat few thought possible.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
Morgan Watson found himself in the middle of all of this. To use a phrase from the 60s, far out.
I knew what NASA was, and I knew about President Kennedy's idea of putting a man on the moon, but to think that I could work there.
And that's just what happened. In the fall of 1963, NASA had almost no African Americans in skilled jobs, but they wanted some. So the agency invited Morgan, along with his friends George Bordeaux, Tommy Dubon, Frank Williams, and 3 others from their school to come to a work-study program at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama.
Well, we were the first African-American engineers at NASA.
The newspapers at that time called Morgan and his friends social pioneers. Worried that the white students in their program would think that they were not qualified because they attended a black school.
We went out of our way to study late, to work hard, and do whatever it took to, well, we felt that the whole image of black people were riding on us as professionals, and we couldn't fail. Failure was not an option for us.
In order to graduate, Morgan needed to take a math class, but it was only offered at an all-white college. The governor of Alabama, George Wallace, wanted to keep the universities segregated.
The governor is adamant. He made a campaign promise to stand in the doorway himself to prevent the integration of the last all-white state university.
Morgan and one of his friends quietly enrolled in the class.
All we knew is we needed the class. And Governor Wallace, anybody else could try and stand in the door and stop us, but we needed that class.
After he graduated from college, Morgan continued to work in the space program.
I worked for Chrysler, which was one of the NASA contractors, and they made the booster capsule that took man to the moon, the very first stage of the moon rocket.
In the 1960s, NASA represented the future. The scientists and the engineers there were the best and the brightest, and Morgan Watson was one of them.
The space program certainly helped change the South by showing that there were black professionals who could do that. You proved the fact that people were available that could do it. It helped to break the walls down. It helped change people's perception of black people in the South.